beginning of time. And so as we say, coming together is the easy part, as a beginning. Staying together is process, but working together is success. So I hope we're able to kind of achieve this latter way, because that's really kind of where we need to get to. For those of you who were not in the workshop, our mindset, our framework really kind of goes back to what we call, we look at the industrial production economies, and we look at the knowledge creative economies. And what we've said is that the production economies look a lot like plantation, in this case a tea plantation. And everything tends to be in very nice orderly rows because it's highly efficient and we waste the fewest amount of resources. And so ultimately, it's about the engineering of the process. We take our knowledge we've gained and we use it to apply a better process. And that better process wastes fewer resources and therefore optimizes our outcomes. Pretty straightforward. The rainforest mentality says we are now instead of a mindset of scarcity and linearity, we're in a mindset of abundance and abstraction and non-linearity. And that in the rainforest, the most important things are very often the weeds. So really in this room, when we design our ecosystem, it's about how do we create a place where the environment is optimized so that the weeds, the good weeds, can flourish and that they can become something else. So when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak walk into the venture lab, you not only have the ability to recognize and identify the human potential of what they're doing, but you can support in ways that are meaningful to help them realize their. So, the next question is, where do we start on this journey? Slide is at the beginning, the most important part. And we start by unlearning. This may seem to be a bit unintuitive, but what we find is because these are such different mindsets, if we begin giving you new tools and knowledge, you tend to layer them or stack them on top of your existing knowledge. They're not highly referential. We get into these knowledge that looks a lot like something we know. We form our pattern. What we have to do is untangle our existing knowledge, and that's where we start. Sometimes, really all it takes is a shift in perspective. So, if I show this to you, what would you say it is? So yes, it's the bottom of the Eiffel Tower. But because we see it from a different perspective, it's beautiful, it's different. Sometimes we can say, our pattern will say, there's a familiarity. We see certain things that we might recognize, and because I asked you to see it, you're all of a sudden saying, I know it must be something, important or referential. And of course, there's lots of different perspectives we can look at things, but every time we look at something with a slightly different perspective, we see it completely fresh and new. A lot of corporations, what they've done to kind of help their employees gain a different perspective, they've done things such as they've closed the front doors and they make people walk around to the back door for the very first time, maybe even through the loading dock. And what's interesting is when employees do that, they have to walk through different pathways into the same workspace that they've worked into for 20 years. For some reason, they begin noticing things that they've never noticed before. People they've never noticed before, doors they've never noticed before. And sometimes it's not about shifting your perspective 180 degrees. Sometimes it's only shifting it just 5 degrees over. And so anything you can do, not only internally to the library, but when you work with the community, just help people to see things just slightly different for your consideration. Because people will be naturally resistant to change. People only change for one of 4 reasons. Crisis, social will to be accepted, political mandate, or to evolve. And so that's why crisis can be wonderful ways to motivate people because it brings people together. But in the absence of a crisis, people want to change. And so you have to give people a reason to change. You have to show them how it's in their best interest to change. And sometimes that can be as easy as just slightly shifting their perspective so that they see the same thing they've seen every day, but they see it in a slightly new way. And that's really kind of what we've done. The reason we use analogies and metaphors is because we're very visual thinkers. And when we give people new knowledge, it just helps them shift it. And of course, these are very iconic, and you need very little pattern recognition to know that this is the Eiffel Tower. But when you look at this, and you say, well, that's also the Eiffel Tower. There we go. Or come sit in front too. We have seats up front. People will say that this is the Eiffel Tower too, but indeed it is not the Eiffel Tower. Code can tell you what this is. You know what that is? That's the Tokyo Tower. That's the Tokyo Tower. But our pattern recognition is set up just to notice familiar patterns. And so sometimes, even when you have information in front of you that looks familiar, we will often jump to immediate conclusions and say, this is this. And sometimes you have to question your basic assumptions. And that's why lateral thinking is really good. So in the process we're going to work in groups today, we're going to actually encourage some of that lateral thinking. So if I were to ask you to, which square is darker, A or B, what would you say? Which is darker? A is darker than B. Most people would say that. They are actually the same. They're the same, but it's all a matter of perspective. That's exactly what it is. The reason we think A is darker is because it's on a dark square and it's surrounded by light. Therefore, our references tell us that this is greater than this. But actually, it's completely referential. So sometimes our minds play tricks with us with the basic information we're given. So part of unlearning and gaining a shift in perspective is being open to new ideas and being open to new perspectives. And sometimes you don't get that on your own, so other people have to show it to you. Of course, you'll recognize this if Audie has ever presented anything about the D school and the D thinking, but this is just a healing process, and we've actually taken the same process and tried to apply it to our work. Where really, how do we observe the world around us, and by observing it, identify and define a certain set of needs and then apply them. You'll see the RainForest canvas is really just a synthesis of some of the stuff, because what we're going to do today is we're going to do these two, and we're going to move into the idea phase, and then you'll be able to take these canvas and what you're doing and draw it out. So we show that the canvas process is really one of a very simple and straightforward work. We're going to do an assessment. Today we're going to do a brief assessment, a diagnostic on the Ahmedabad region. We're going to ask a lot of questions. And then based on the answers that we're all having a conversation about, we're going to talk about what we then do with that information. We then can design our rainforest, build upon it, iterate. We can leave you all these slides so you can examine them in more detail. When we do our Rainforest Architects Workshop, where we work with people exactly like you, and if we were to have a 3-day workshop together, we would actually drill into this. And the way our team, Ade, Jan, Victor, and I think about these rainforests is really, when we talk about the unlearning, we really kind of start up here at the systems level. How do entire ecosystems work? What are the rules by which they behave? It's the equivalent of if you actually went to a real rainforest, you would be flying over the canopy of the rainforest, and you'd be seeing it in its entirety. You would then dive under the canopy of the rainforest, and what you would notice is that there's a lot of people interacting with one another. That's society, that's our community. And really, what is it about society that allows it to function? And today, one of the exercises we are going to do is the social contract. And the social contract is our informal set of rules that we have based on the values, common values we all hold. And that is really all systems function because the societies within them function. And the more functional the society, the more functional the system. But eventually we drive down to the self, because if you take a microscope and look at this, and you dive from under the canopy, and you go all the way to the ground, it's inhabited by individuals. And in this case, the self. All innovation is human-centric. It eventually is about people acting and engaging out of a sense of belief and purpose that they will then do it. So it's then, what is it about the self that really allows us to work? Then at that point, when we understand all that, then we can begin learning again. And the learning takes the form of, how do you build teams? You have all these individuals, particularly high-functioning individuals with lots of different perspectives, skills, viewpoints, life experiences. How do these people come together in a functional team to actually produce outstanding and extraordinary results? How do you build a culture, the soft things, the software that sits around these teams that allows them to extend well beyond their individual capabilities? And then eventually, how do you build your entire rainforest? So if You started at the big level and you've come back to the big level. But you've redesigned it, you've repurposed it, you've reconstructed it. So we say that the Rainforest Campus is the equivalent of sequencing your regional genome. And an example I can give you is when we were working with the Saudi government, we had the Saudis come in and talk to us, and they told us about their experiences working with some very prestigious consulting firms and prestigious universities, and they said it didn't work out very well. And I said, why was that? They said, because they said, well, if you just want to be like the Silicon Valley, just do what we did. Just build this venture fund or this incubator and be like us. And they said there was little resonance around that. It was the equivalent in our rainforest methodology is that the ground was hard clay, and someone just took an open fire hose and poured water on it. It just completely ran off because the soil had not been prepared properly for them to absorb that knowledge. So we sequence the regional genome. Just as in your human genome, there are those things that you can affect, that you can change. There are also those things you cannot change. Certain things like physical geography, the temperature. And it's good to understand what you can eat, but even more importantly, what you can't. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. It's easy to decide the things you're going to do. The hardest thing is going to probably be deciding the things you shouldn't be doing. And so this is what the Rainforest Canvas looks like. And you don't have them in front of yourselves yet, right? No. Okay. So we distribute. Yeah, you can distribute those, and then we can distribute the action points. Right now, we're just going to do one per table of these, but then everyone has individual. How many of you have ever worked with the business model canvas? And we didn't produce any of the small ones for the So, let's get back to this. You okay? Just build one horsepower. Okay. So, think of this canvas like an artist's canvas. It starts off completely blank, and it's going to be, we're going to be able to create it, and just like a regular canvas, you can paint over it. So there's nothing permanent, there's nothing protective about it, and eventually this will be a living, breathing document for you. What this is, it's a place to place all of your assumptions and hypotheses about the place you live and work, your community. It's not there to put facts, and some of the things may be facts, but in generally it's mostly hypothesis. Because what we will tell you is that inside of this room, there are no facts. All the facts exist out in the market, out in the community. And the only thing we can do is put our best guesses down here. And then, well, one of the things we're going to ask you, just as if you were doing a scientific experiment, you would say, we have a hypothesis. The next question is how do we validate that hypothesis? What experiments can we create to either support or refute what it is that we think may or may not happen? And that's really what this is for. And then once we get a comprehensive picture, then and only then can we then begin building our community. So the canvas is laid out in this way for a particular reason. Because one of the questions we always ask every time we do an action is, this action has to be in service to something, in service to something greater. So in this case, why do we exist? Why are we here? I can only assume because you may or may not have the same idea, but in general, people are here to